Hello and welcome to the Love and Cherish podcast with me, Laura Howe. Today, I have the remarkable pleasure and privilege of being joined with Michele Weiner-Davis, who is a marriage therapist and author of The Sex-Starved Marriage and Healing from Infidelity, amongst other fantastic books. Michele is also a speaker, and her Sex-Starved Marriage TED Talk is, I think, around about the 9.5 million views to date, which is quite remarkable. Welcome to the podcast.
I'm so happy that I'm here. Thanks for inviting me.
So my first question is, would you mind please explaining what is a sex-starved marriage?
So first, I will say what it is not. It's not the number of times that people have sex, weekly, because unlike vitamins, there are no daily or weekly requirements to ensure a healthy sex life. What I've discovered in my 40 years practically of specializing in work with couples, a sex-starved marriage is one where one spouse is desperately longing for more touch, more physical connection, more sex. And the other spouse is thinking like, what is the big deal? Would you just get a life? It's just sex. But to the person yearning for that physical closeness, it's much more than just sex. It's about feeling wanted. It's about feeling loved. It's about feeling connected, emotionally connected. And it's about feeling masculine if you're a guy or feminine if you're a woman. And when the lower desire spouse doesn't get it and really just thinks, well, why don't you just take a cold shower? What tends to happen is intimacy on all levels tends to drop away. They stop sitting next to each other on the couch. They stop laughing at other's jokes. They stop enjoying being together or experiencing time together. They start going their separate ways. And it really does put the marriage at risk of infidelity and even divorce. And there's something else that actually happens in these relationships. I know you've talked about it, but a lot of therapists don't talk about it. A lot of people don't talk about it. And that is this unspoken agreement in those relationships where the lower desire spouse expects their partner to understand no sex, not complain about it. And also, here's the other one, to be monogamous. Mm-hmm. And this is an unfair and unworkable arrangement. And again, this is something that so few people really talk about. When a person isn't willing to try to understand the needs of a higher desire spouse, it's not that that person is necessarily mean or manipulative or controlling. It's just that they simply do not get what it means to the higher desire spouse to be physically close. They tell themselves, the lower desire spouse tells him or herself, it's just a biological urge. It's like scratching an itch. But it is so much more than that. And part of my job has been to really, in a sense, almost translate the meaning that it has for the higher desire spouse in the relationship. And when the lower desire spouse hears that person say, and I've learned a lot from my clients, I really have. I hear the higher desire person say things like, when we are disconnected, I feel so lost in the world. When we are physically close, it's as if everything in the world is okay. I feel safe. I feel at home. And I think people who have lower desire are they're either shocked to hear that, or I've actually had lower desire spouses say, I don't believe you, which is a tough one to swallow because it is absolutely true.
How interesting, because there does seem to be quite a lot of anger, and I'm not sure. I'm very sure. I'm sorry. I imagine that you're very aware of that yourself, because you do seem to have a presence, sort of in the online space. But that's a sense I get, that there's lots of concern regarding coercive, controlling behaviour. I wondered if you'd be able to speak a bit about that, Michele, because I get quite confused about why these, what I would see as healthy needs and drives for connection, are being viewed through such a fear-based, perhaps somewhat paranoid and even angry lens.
Well, I think there probably are a lot of different reasons. The first one is, although I think low desire in men is a very well kept secret, but it's a
Mhm.
real thing. As a matter of fact, one of my books was called The Sex Starved Wife. In addition to The Sex Starved Marriage, I wrote about the sex starved wife because in my first book on the topic, The Sex Starved Marriage, I devoted a mere 5 pages to the unique struggles that women who have higher desire go
Mm.
through,
Yeah.
because they're experiencing a lack of physical connection in the relationship. But culturally speaking, they wonder what is wrong with them. Are they not attractive? Are they not lovable? Because nobody talks about it. So
Mhm.
when I was inundated with emails and calls from women saying, thank you so much for writing about this topic because we don't really hear too much about it. It was a great relief to write some more about it. But what I'm saying there is so often the notion is that more men than women are interested in sex, and the truth is, it typically does go that way. It doesn't always
Yeah.
go that way, but it typically
Mhm.
does go that way. And
Mm.
there's such um, people have radar out for being controlled by men. And so the
Mm.
fact that sometimes men really yearn for that physical touch more than women, for many women, and this is perpetuated in our culture, being receptive or being caring about something that their husbands want, but maybe that it's not top of mind for them,
Yeah.
feels like men are controlling them. And I think that is one of the things. I think there's another thing, and it's in our field. I think therapists do people a great disservice when they put this whole notion of feelings on a pedestal.
Mhm.
And what I mean by that is, I think that all people are kind of told that how you feel should guide everything that you do in the moment. Um, and if you interview anybody who's successful at anything in life, whether it's a parent or a spouse or a business person, you name it, they will tell you there are times where your feelings misguide you and that you really
Mm.
have to think about what is your ultimate goal in terms of being a parent, in terms of being a spouse, or in terms of being a sibling. And then you should behave consistently with the goal that you have in mind. I mean, I'll give you an example that is not a spousal example, but one of
Mhm.
my, just like you were saying, Laura, one of my very important goals in life, if not the most important goal in life, is to be a great parent. And I've always
Mm.
felt that way.
Mm.
And part of that definition for me included reading my kids' bedtime stories as they were going to sleep. As someone who had a busy career, and
Mm.
both my husband and I did, do you think that every night I felt like when I was tired, exhausted from the day, reading my kid a bedtime story? There were
No, I
so many nights
don't.
I just wish they could go to sleep by themselves.
Yeah.
But I always downplayed my feeling in the moment to think, how will I feel once I get through this story? And
Yeah.
then give myself permission to go to bed. I
Mm.
was behaving consistently with my goal. And so part of what I have noticed with a lot of people who have lower desire, when their spouses approach them and reach out to them and try to initiate sex, the only internal check they do is, am I in the mood? Am I not in the mood? instead of including in that inner journey, what may just taking a half an hour or 45 minutes or however long this takes, when my spouse is really interested in being physical, how will that improve my relationship with him? How
That's
will that
beautiful.
make me feel, once we get going? And so but I do think there is really such an emphasis on noticing what you're feeling and behaving consistently with what you're feeling instead of looking at the bigger picture.
I think that's beautiful, Michelle. I've never heard it put quite that way. I think I've grasped that myself. That is how I tend to live. But it's lovely to see. Sorry to hear you say it and articulate it so beautifully. That you want to place, yes, the goal of a successful marriage and have your decisions, being in line with that goal rather than being influenced by how you feel. One of the things that I wanted to say was that my audience is predominantly male, and a huge amount of them are in what they would describe as sexless marriages, or how you would describe sex-starved marriages. So I wondered if you could say something to those chaps who are really very much well, some of them are depressed, some of them are, really not very well at all, and some of them have been in these experiences for decades. Yes, I'm wondering what you would say to those chaps, Michelle.
Well, the first thing I would say is if it's at all possible, get their wives to watch the TEDx talk.
Yeah,
Because seriously, Laura, I have had so many people, men, write to me thanking me for the talk because they did get their wives to watch it and it did make a difference. I mean, I actually had one guy who said, not only did it turn things around in my marriage, but actually I was this close to considering suicide, and it
yeah,
completely
yeah.
saved my life. So I get
Wow.
what you're saying about your listeners.
Mm.
It is depressing when you don't feel seen or heard or loved, and you feel, even if especially if you're someone who's decided it's not, I'm not the kind of person who's going to seek have my needs met outside of the relationship. It
Yeah.
feels so stuck. And stuckness is really the stuff that depression is made of, is feeling
Mm,
that there is no light at the end of the tunnel, that there is no escape hatch from the feelings that I'm experiencing.
mm.
Um, what I'm going to be perfectly honest with you. When I know that this is what's been going on in a relationship for a long time, who I really want to talk to is the wife.
Yeah,
And,
absolutely.
because it's my job to help the lower desire spouse to really get what's going on here. And I don't know what experiences your listeners have had, and maybe you can speak to that about how they've tried to get help for their relationship and get their spouse to come in. Can you say something about that?
Well, interestingly, a lot of people haven't had help. They don't get help, and that's it. That's fascinating to me. I now have clients who have said things to me like, "I have never talked to anybody, not even my closest friends, about this," which is astonishing. And I noted in your books, you said or maybe it was in podcasts that I've watched you on, where you said you've had clients who have never talked about sex in their marriage. So I think as a therapist, I think I'm a bit sort of naive to how little other people talk. I think everybody's sort of operating the same way my husband and I do after years of, self-development, but they're not. So sorry, back to your point. Yes, I think that a lot of them haven't got help. And I think that I don't know what you would say about this, but I get a sense that perhaps men are quite vulnerable to hopelessness and that they get stuck in that a rut there. And they're often, here's the other thing that they say. This is you'd be, I imagine, interested in this. This is a constant phrase. I don't want to talk to my wife. It's not worth it. I've tried before. It doesn't go anywhere. It's like walking into a minefield. It's not worth it. So there's a lot of that sentiment, Michele.
Well, when someone says something like that to me, I always like to do a deeper dive into finding out specifically the way they've approached it.
Uh-huh.
My experience so many years where this has been an issue, because people do get to me from that book or from the TEDx talk, but my experience has been that initially men will approach their wives in a open-hearted, vulnerable sort of way and say, listen, I miss
Yes.
you. Are you still attracted to me? Do you love me? And when those attempts are met with coldness or nothing changing, for a lot of men, at least men here in the States, and I don't know if it's different internationally, but a lot of men convert very, very quickly to anger. They just shut down. They're no longer, coming home and asking their wives, how was your day? Do you want to
Yeah.
go out to dinner? They shut down. They're angry and they're irritable. And
Mm.
you and I both know that irritability is not an aphrodisiac. And so
No.
it just confirms in women's minds, I will never have sex with somebody who acts like that. And
Yeah.
so she shuts down even more, and he gets even angrier and more withdrawn and more hopeless. And
Yeah.
that's where they completely go separate ways. So one of the things I always like to do is to ask guys, what did you say? How did you approach her? How did you present what you're feeling? And if it's been more in terms of, I can't believe I married this ice queen and I'm not going to put up with this in an
Yeah.
angry sort of way,
Hmm.
I help that person to find a softer, gentler way that would appeal and land, and we would have a chance of landing in the heart of his spouse. So it's finding out what has been the usual approach and seeing if there is a way that I could help that person tweak, what he has been doing so that his wife might be more receptive. And by the way, I know this is going to sound weird, but sometimes um, I've worked with guys who are they're as sweet as can be. They're despondent. They go into despair, and they never. I mean, this is just the opposite of what I said before. They never really lay it out in
Mm-hmm.
clear, almost not angry, but like, I don't know how much more of this I can handle.
Yeah.
This is really unacceptable to me, almost like a
Hmm.
boundary that you would about anything else.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
I've had some women be more responsive to that than some their husbands just checking out and not being emotionally available.
I bet you have. That's all very, very helpful. Thank you, Michele. Um, yeah, so you talk about the catch-22, don't you? That the he I think you say he tunes out and then she turns off. And then when a woman turns off, he tunes out. So you've got this sort of downward spiral. And I guess that's what you are referring to when you refer to the sex-starved marriage, this cold, relatively miserable daily experience, which is not what anybody dreams of at all, is it? So that's for the chaps, I guess. Perhaps get help, as in look for somebody like Michele or somebody who is definitely going to be open to talking about sex, and somebody who believes that sex is healthy and ideally is part of a relationship, because not all therapists believe that
Well,
nowadays, which is
that's
shocking.
exactly right, Laura, because I don't know how what you learned in graduate school, but I can tell you what I
Nothing.
learned.
Nothing.
I get it. I get it. But one of the things I did learn is that if a couple's sex life stinks and they're having emotional quarrels, just fix the emotional part of it and the rest will fall into place. And I am here to
Mm,
tell you That is
Yeah.
what I did for many years. That is what I did. I would
Right.
make sure that they were resolving things, that they were spending time together. And you know what
Hmm.
sometimes happened? Nothing. Nothing
Yeah,
happened.
I
Nothing
can
changed
imagine.
in the
Yeah.
bedroom. And so
Uh-huh.
then I started to wonder, you know what? This is really one person is upset about not spending enough time together, not having good enough communication, and the other is upset about not being physically close. And all the time as a therapist, I was focusing on the first person's need. And I
Hmm.
realized how biased that was. So
Yeah.
I started to experiment by getting them to talk more openly. And I had not learned about doing that openly about sex
Hmm.
because the opposite appeared to also be true. You know, get them touching more,
Yeah.
get them hearing that physical connection is a priority, should be a priority. And then maybe it'll be easier for them to resolve some of those emotional issues as a result. And that is absolutely true. But I would say a huge percentage of therapists are still operating off of that principle of fix the emotions and sex will follow. And it's simply not true. Thank God for sex therapists who really do understand the
Hmm.
difference it can make in a relationship when couples prioritize touch and they don't allow it to dissipate over time in their relationship.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So yes, get help with somebody who you trust will really deal with the problem rather than see it as a byproduct of a generally perhaps not emotionally connected enough relationship. To the chaps who have become very despondent and perhaps haven't got to the place where they have been perhaps clear enough about how painful the situation is and how much they're suffering. For them, perhaps speak out, as challenging as that is. And if you need help with and support to get to that place, then find a therapist. And then for the chaps who have perhaps got lost to anger and resentment, perhaps start thinking about warming things up and approaching your partner in perhaps a more tender and loving way. That definitely helped with Russell and I should say that he started being incredibly attentive. He read your book. I mean, I reread your book over the last few days to refresh my memory, and it was so much more clear reading it this time how much he did from what you told him to do. He gave me so much space to go out and ride my bike. He helped me refresh my wardrobe so it was more colorful, and he really brought me back to life. I'd got somewhat stuck in mum mode, and he reminded me that there was more to me than that. And he was very tender and made it very, very clear that what he wanted was a really loving connection with his wife. And yeah, so that definitely worked for me. He really helped me. Yeah, and he really helped me uh, deal with some of the stuff that you talk to the low desire partner about, my body image, sort of some childhood issues, Michelle. So I think that's the perhaps the last thing I'll ask you to talk about, because you talk. Would you indulge me? I'm going to read you a quote, one of your quotes. You say you have to decide to make having a vibrant, exciting, emotionally satisfying sexual relationship a priority. And yeah, so I wonder if you could expand on that somewhat and talk just briefly before we move on to infidelity. If you could talk perhaps a little briefly to the low desire partner about what in my audience would be she, but what I hear you saying is she or he who's perhaps in that place.
Will you remind me of this? Because I know that I'm not going to answer your question unless you remind me of, but I want to just
Okay.
say something about the work the two of you did.
Okay,
Because
sure.
this really is where the rubber meets the road. So if you picture a woman who is shut down because her husband is irritable, and a guy who's like getting more and more irritable or withdrawn because his wife is sexually anorexic. You just
Yeah.
picture
Yeah.
that. And so they're in polarized positions.
Hmm.
The very thing that I ask people to do that you and Russ did, which is a wonderful thing, is I'm asking, for example, for, the wife, instead of saying to herself, I married such a jerk. He just is so shut down. He's in his man cave. He doesn't participate with the family. He never asks me how my day was. I'm asking this woman in that mindset to
Hmm.
say to herself that when she sees him like that, what it really means is that he's hurt and that he's
Mm.
missing her. And that the thing she has to do, regardless of what she's thinking or feeling, is to reach out to him in a way that says love to him. She needs to say, wow, you look hot in those jeans, or
Mm.
do you want to make love? Or grab his butt as he's passing in the hall. And conversely, what I'm saying to a guy who feels so rejected and so hurt and sometimes so angry, instead of saying to himself, I'm not going to live the rest of my life with a person like that. I can't believe I married her because she is so unattentive to my needs and she's so shut down sexually. What he really has to do is ask himself, when was the last time I really showed interest in her life? I participated
Yeah.
more at home. I was the
Yeah.
one to schedule date nights or to get the babysitter. I was the one to ask her how she's feeling. Now,
Mm.
here's the deal about both those things. Those are huge asks because what I'm asking is that both people do the very thing they don't want to do at the time they least feel like doing it because they feel shortchanged. It's huge. But when people take personal responsibility, as the two of you did, for your role in the breakdown of things in the moment, that's
Right.
truly when miracles happen. And you did it. And it's hard work. And too many people, and I know you know this, say, why shouldn't I be the one to change? It's my
Yeah.
partner's to
Hmm.
blame.
You
You're right.
first.
So
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
just have to
Definitely.
say that to really, I to pat yourselves on the back because it's hard to get out of your head and out of your body to really think about the other person and what they need and to give that when you're feeling so rejected and shortchanged. But that's when good things happen.
That's true, and it reminds me of I can't remember who the psychologist was, but it was a quote on love being the active concern for the life and growth of that which we love. And that isn't, I mean, that doesn't always in fact, when you feel like doing something, that's easy, isn't it? I think love is most present. And obviously, this isn't mine. I wish it was, Michelle. This sentiment is not mine, obviously, but it's a magnificent truth, isn't it? That we are perhaps most loving when we do the things that are right and needed because because that's what's needed, as you said earlier in the conversation, because you're headed to that. You're going to keep the family together. You're going to manage to stay married, sorry, against all the odds. And that's a beautiful thing. It really is. And it does, sorry, please.
No, 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 no. There is one other piece that I think is super important because it was a major misunderstanding for many people who watched my TEDx talk. I would never in a million years be suggesting that people who have had sexual abuse in their background,
Yeah.
or that it's physically painful, or that there's something about touch or sex that's abhorrent to them. I would never suggest that they just do it and consider the
No.
feelings of their partner. But it's really important for particularly women to understand the difference, and I know you know this, between responsive desire and
Yeah.
spontaneous desire. Most people think about desire as you're doing anything else. You're like writing checks, or you're doing some sort of homework, or you're doing laundry, and all of a sudden you get this really horny feeling and you got to find your partner.
Hmm.
Because maybe when you were in your 20s, that did happen. And so you're thinking
Yeah.
that that's what desire is about. And for many, many men, that is what desire is about. But for millions of women, our bodies are wired differently.
Yeah.
And we need to be physically stimulated or stimulated in some way, even from a neutral starting point, in order
Mm,
for our brains to go, yeah, this feels good. This is
mm,
fun. I'm enjoying this.
yeah.
And then for a lot of women, having an orgasm, feeling close to their partners, and then the additional relationship benefits that come from their spouses being happy about the fact that they just had sex. So it's not doing something you don't want to do, but it's being willing, if your body is working that way, to start from a neutral starting point, because maybe you're thinking about other things like making lunches for the kids, or the housework that didn't get done when your spouse approaches you. But if you're willing to at least give it a shot and see how it feels, so many women say, that was a great experience. And that's who I'm talking about when I say just do it. It's just jumpstart it and see how that goes.
I love that you got to speak about that, because I've read some of the comments on your talks, and I get them. We get them ourselves, and we're very careful to add a proviso. That we're not talking to couples who are in a seriously abusive relationship. We're not talking to people that are in that situation. That's a very different situation. And as you say, we're not talking to people who are experiencing pain. Of course, you wouldn't advocate that. But what you explained just there in terms of the difference between spontaneous desire and responsive desire was so helpful to me. Again, I remember the story that you told about the man that said something like, "I wish I could write it on my wife's hand," something like that. I like sex, and for just you telling that story, it helped with my anxieties regarding that. And I have to say, Michele, sometimes even when I lay down with my husband, today as the therapist that I am, and I'm constantly talking about sex and relationships it's almost all we ever talk about. But still, sometimes I have to just say to myself, it's okay. Just relax. It's gonna come. It's because I definitely have that type of desire, and it does come. And but it's interesting that there is that. What I'm trying to say is that I get it. If you have that kind of you
Responsive
respond,
desire.
yes, respond that way,
Yeah.
then yes, it can feel somewhat more difficult to approach the situation. But like other aspects of life that are somewhat daunting, the more you do it, the less difficult it becomes.
Right. And I've told you even before we started talking that we're kindred spirits. This is another way you and I are kindred spirits, because same deal, same deal. And it's probably one of the reasons I started noticing it in my clients was the fact that, there are a lot of times I'm preoccupied with other stuff.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah.
once I get into it, I'm really into it. So knowing that I'm not a person with low desire or no desire, but rather that
That's
I need
right.
to get jump started. And there's so many women who say, thank you for saying that, because I thought
Yeah.
there was
I
something
bet.
wrong with me.
Yes, I get that so much, Michele, and it's such a relief, and it's such a beautiful gift again to offer another fellow human being and a woman that yes, as you say, that she's not faulty. So many women feel faulty,
Yeah.
and that's just so sad. And it's a beautiful thing, isn't it, to go on a sexual journey and to become sexually healthy. Nobody at school, in England, I don't know what it's like in America, but when they talk about sexual health, they don't tell you much about the relationship side and the psychosexual side. I didn't even know what psychosexual. When I remember coming across the term as a therapist and thinking, what on earth is that? I mean, how strange that you would get to your sort of 20s and not know that sexuality and psychology cross over. That your
That's right.
that all of these things interweave, and that of course, like being physically fit is the ideal. heal. Being sexually fit and psychosexually well is obviously more fun. It makes you more whole. You're going to enjoy your life a tremendous amount more than if you're
Absolutely.
not. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely
Yeah,
true.
so I'm very because I don't know how long I've got you for. Are you happy to talk for another 15 minutes, Michelle?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So shall we move over to the juicy topic of and serious topic of infidelity? Because obviously you offer these 2-day marriage intensives where you get couples who are on, I think you call them 911 couples, or couples who are on the brink of separation and are certainly perhaps in crisis. And I'm assuming some of those people are coming to you in the aftermath of infidelity. So, where do we start with infidelity? What do you think do you think the way you would describe infidelity now has changed as a result of social media, those kinds of things, emotional affairs? How would you define infidelity, if you wouldn't mind me asking, Michelle?
Well, first I want to say that I'm just guessing because I don't have hard statistics about this, but I would say at least 90% of the couples who work with me intensively over 2 days, and that, by the way, that's exclusively what I do and have for a long time.
Yeah.
90% of them are dealing with infidelity because they've gotten to my book or my audiobook, Healing from Infidelity.
Mhm. Okay.
And and I think the reason that they seek my help is because, and I'll answer your question in a moment, but is because um, I make it pretty clear that not only is it possible to heal your marriage after betrayal, but I think most people, believe it or not, want to. They just don't know
Yeah.
how.
Yeah.
And there's no reason they should know how, especially if it's like their first time, they're in uncharted territory.
Yeah.
And so often when people go to get help, they're seeking help from someone who has not had a lot of experience or actually specific training in helping
Yeah.
couples through infidelity. And therapists rely on sort of garden variety therapy skills, which is just getting people to talk openly about their feelings, which doesn't work when there's that sort
No.
of crisis in the marriage. And
Sure.
so one of the things, and again, I mentioned before, I've learned from my clients, I've been in the trenches with couples whose marriages have been torn asunder by a betrayal. And I have learned what works, what doesn't work. And the promise I made to myself early on in my career that I would try to eliminate things that don't work and really emphasize things that do work. And of course, that's different for everybody, but there are some patterns in terms of things that do work. And one of the
I
things
bet.
that works is when people are so distraught because there's been an affair. They need direction. They need to be told, here are some steps you both need to take in order to work through these very difficult junctures in your marriage in the weeks and months ahead. So finding somebody who really knows what they're doing, who can say, do this, don't do that. Of course, you're
Yeah.
going to feel that. Here's how to
Mhm.
handle it the next time that happens. Getting clear, directive advice is super important for anybody going through this. Now, in answer to your question, how do I define it? It's always, for me, it's always been the same, that betrayal is in the eye of the beholder. In
Mm.
other words, when you are married, you may have different ideas about what constitutes betrayal, but in the same way that you and I've been talking, Laura, about really caring, I mean, it has to be about us, not just about me. Caring
Mhm.
about your partner's feelings. If it's uncomfortable for your partner that you go out with your girlfriends and go to nightclubs and dance with other guys, if that's uncomfortable, even if you think it's okay because it's just a dance, then you have to take their feelings into consideration. So I do think that emotional infidelity is a thing. I do think that you have to allow for your partner to share with you what feels safe and what doesn't feel safe.
Yeah.
But nowadays, and again, I don't know whether it's more out in the open or whether it's my select audience because people are coming to me because of my book. But it's unbelievable how often that is what's happening in people's relationships. There's been an affair, or sometimes multiple affairs. And what is also interesting to me is how incredibly devastating that is to the person who's been betrayed. And I'll give you an example. I was just thinking about this. This was a couple that I worked with a few years ago. She started early in the session by telling me she had been very, very close to her own family, mother, father, and two siblings. And then within a year and a half span, all of them, for different reasons, died. One was a car
Gosh,
accident, one was an overdose sibling, and her mother and her father had some health conditions, and they all died. She was the
that's
last
so
one
sad.
standing. And to hear how incredibly resilient this woman was, successful businesswoman, great mom, um, she she was she was a sterling example of somebody who got herself back on her feet. And then she told me that her husband had a 4-month affair. And then she said, "I just want to die." She said, "His affair defines me." And she took my breath away. Um, and that is how it feels to so many people. I mean, everybody's different, of course, but the most common thing that I hear is that I knew things weren't perfect, but in a million years, I never thought my spouse would be able to do this. And then, of course, not only the affair itself, but typically what goes hand in hand are the lies after the affair,
Yeah.
learning
Yeah.
about it as
Yeah.
people go through time rather than in one fell swoop. It's
Yeah.
it's it's really, really challenging.
Yes, it looks absolutely devastating to people. It's something to behold. It would almost, if only you could, if people could go on an infidelity awareness course, not just what it does to the spouse who's betrayed, but to the person who has the affair. That's the other thing that I've seen, Michelle, I'm sure you have too, that the person who is engaging in infidelity ends up a wreck themselves because it must send you into a sort of spiral in terms of self-trust and self-belief, and it must rock your sense of yourself massively. Yes, so recovery for both parties is quite the road. So it's
Yeah.
quite a tremendous thing that you offer that to people, such a holding experience. I was quite taken aback by your move to offer intensive. When I heard you say that you'd done that, just from my own experience, that it was obvious to me immediately why you would do that, because in an hour you're just opening up the whole nightmare that they're stuck in the middle of and not able to offer much in the way of, as you say, what to do, how to go about this whole thing.
Well, the typical place for people to come to seek help, at least in my experience, has been when they've tried to, there's been the discovery, there's been, sort of the devastating marathon talks. There seems to be a little bit of clearing. The betrayed spouse typically has a million questions because they're trying to make sense of their now upside down life.
Yeah.
Initially, the unfaithful spouse is quite willing to share some information, wanting to sort of put out the fire.
Yeah.
And they may even have a good few hours or a good day, and then all of a sudden there's a trigger, and they feel like they're back to square one. And so what happens is the unfaithful spouse starts to wonder how are we ever going to heal if we just keep talking about this? It's like picking at a scab.
Hmm.
We will never
Yeah.
get better. And
Yeah.
to the betrayed spouse, that what they typically think is, if you aren't willing to talk to me about this, it means that you cannot fathom the pain that I'm in, and I know this isn't going to go anywhere, and I can't do this. And so they are stuck in this very hopeless position, and they seek help, I think primarily, at least initially, to find out from the referee who's right and who's wrong, when the truth of the matter, in my experience, is that they're both right. But that said, in other words, I've never really met a couple who, when the betrayed spouse has a yearning to make sense of it and talk about it and ask questions about it, if that doesn't happen, they don't heal. But conversely, there comes a time, and it's a developmental stage, when if all you're doing is talking about it, it's hard to remember why you're doing this in the first place, which is to stay married. But here's the deal. And this is, again, a mistake that I think so many therapists make. There's an assumption, there's an underlying assumption that if there's an affair, there's something wrong with the marriage. And so when they come in and there's a crisis and they're both sitting on a mountain of emotions, one of the very first things that a lot of untrained therapists will do is focus on, well, what was wrong in the marriage that could have opened up possibilities for the infidelity to happen? And that's when betrayed spouses start to feel like you're blaming the victim. And even if it's true that there are voids in the marriage that need to be addressed, and certainly now that there's been betrayal, there are things in the marriage that need to be addressed. If you don't focus on the crisis of infidelity, on the post-traumatic stress that people feel as a result, there is no way that you're going to heal. So in the same way that you would never expect an infant to, wake up one morning and walk, they have to crawl, they have to, toddle, before they're actually walking, focusing on what happened and the feelings around what happened, and an open and honest disclosure, it has to precede any attempt to feel any sort of normalcy in the relationship.
That makes sense. Interestingly, I wonder, I'd like to ask you a question, a direct question, because I've talked to people about the infidelity is a sort of grief that like grief, it almost has its own pace. And when you talk to people who are grieving, you're very careful to talk about self-care. That you have to, as hard as it is, remind the people who are suffering that they're going to struggle to take care of themselves, but that's almost the most important part. Certainly at the beginning, that you do keep eating, and if you can, and you sleep, and yes, that you take the time to do for yourself whatever you need to do to kind of yes, to soothe yourself, I guess, because it's so they get so distressed.
Well, I think you're tapping into some important points there. There is grief. I mean, no matter what, everybody has an image of what their marriage is going to be like, about what their spouses are like. And even when the repair work is done, the truth is, they have to assimilate into the tapestry of their marriage the fact that this has happened, and letting go of that image of this innocent marriage, where there is blind trust. There certainly is grief involved in that. The other piece that I am relating to in terms of what you're saying, Laura, is that there's sort of a combination between self-care, things that you need to do for yourself, really basic things, like you say, eating, sleeping, going for a walk, being in the sunshine, whatever those
That's
are.
right.
But there's also a need for the unfaithful spouse to be part of that healing process and do whatever he or she can do to offer comfort. And it's a little crazy making, because seeking comfort from the person who hurt you in the first place, makes so many of the people that I work with feel like they're kind of losing their minds because there is
Mhm.
a sort of push-pull involved with that. And then I guess one other thing, in the same way that when you lose somebody and you're grieving,
Mm.
grief knows no timetable.
No,
And
doesn't.
you just have to be patient. And people who are feeling awful, which they are, patience is hard to come by. You just
Indeed.
want to feel better. But
Mhm.
it's a process. And
Yeah,
my mother, who was also a therapist, she always used to say one of her favorite sayings was, you have to trust the process. And it's absolutely true. I mean, but bringing it around to sort of the good news about all of this. I can't tell you the number of people I've worked with, and I know you've had this experience as well, who, when they're really willing to do the work, they
mhm.
do come out the other side, often saying that our relationship is stronger than it was before. And I would not recommend infidelity as a vehicle for getting there.
No.
But it's absolutely true, and I also tell people that, they hear from loved ones, from family members, "Why would you put up with that? Once a cheater, always a cheater. Kick them to the curb," which is so hurtful to me. And part of my work with people who have been betrayed is to help them to recognize they're not weak for staying, they're not doormats, they're actually warriors. It's really
Mm,
hard
mhm.
to do the work, and they should feel so proud of themselves that they want to work through it to get to the other side, not just for them and their partners and their families if they have kids, but the truth is all marriages go through really difficult times,
They
and to
do.
be able to work through them is really a gift that lasts a lifetime.
Well, I love all of that, Michelle. And one of the things that I don't know who's responsible for this concept, but I think there seems to be a somewhat too often held belief that marriage is supposed to make us happy, and when really the purpose of marriage is to help us grow. So if you hold infidelity and sexual problems under that umbrella, you perhaps do a little better. That if you can let go of this idea that you're never going to have problems, or that problems mean you're not doing a good job, or that there's some fundamental flaw within you. It's like that's not true. It is very difficult to maintain a marriage. You are going to run into trouble because people are complex. And I loved what you said about this unhelpful and erroneous idea that once a cheater, always a cheater. I just think that's ridiculous, because I can say with absolute certainty and some authority that people make miraculous changes, unbelievable changes. People change all the time. So to say that people who've cheated will never stop being a cheater is just horrible. It's so negative. So
I
I'm glad that you
totally
said that.
agree. Yeah,
Yes, and
absolutely.
and just as a because I think we've run out of time. I could talk to you forever, Michelle. There'd be so much more that I could speak to you about. But one of the things that I wanted to say to finish our conversation today is that I have appreciated so much your optimism. I think you refer to yourself as a psychotic optimist, and you said something at the end of your TED talk about that. You said something, but that doesn't matter because it's a catchable disease or something like that. You used a more clever word than me, but I love that you have that. It's such a wholesome and refreshing attitude to have, and it inspires me to see people like you with that attitude so very much.
Well, thank you. I always say that it isn't the differences in people that, is really a problem in marriage. It's when hopelessness sets in, because hopelessness is the real cancer in marriage.
Yeah.
And I've become a psychotic optimist, as you say, because I've seen so many positive changes in marriages that most people would have thought this isn't going to work.
Yes.
And so there certainly is hope.
Well, what a beautiful beautifully strong thing to offer your clients as well. You know, when your clients come to you and they're in the mess that they're in, the chaos, the crisis. I mean, what a beautiful thing you must be. What a presence in their lives to offer them that optimism that your attitude in that respect, I've no doubt, is one of the driving forces that helps guide them from where they are to somewhere more positive, Michele.
Well, thanks. I mean, don't you have the experience that when people come and work with you, I think at least my sense has been most people want to just hear, you're going to be okay. This is going to
Yeah,
be okay. I have some
yeah,
ideas how to make that happen, but it's going to work out. And unfortunately, sometimes people, maybe other ways of working, people look for pathology under every rock. And I, on
yes,
the
they
other
do.
hand, and I can hear that you as well, it's like looking for that shiny exception and really building on that. And so I'm so honored to be talking to you and to know that, as we said, there are kindred spirits in the world spreading hope as you do, as I do, and hopefully
Mm.
more people do as well.
I'm sure. Well, where can people find you, Michele? I mean, I would suggest that everybody starts with one of these amazing books of yours. There are obviously more. I haven't read all of them yet. I apologize, but they can obviously find your books all over the internet. But where else? Are you still taking clients?
Yes, I am. And as a matter of fact, I just had a couple from the UK this week. So yes,
Did you?
yeah. Probably the best way is divorcebusting.com. They can read all about me, and I'm happy to get back to folks. So
All right. Well, we're going to link lots of your stuff in the description of this video. We will definitely add your TED talk because it's magnificent. Michele, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with me today. I have loved every moment.
well, ditto. It's been my pleasure for sure. Thank you, Laura.